There's a problem. Lil Scrappy should have been improving, but now. Recently, the doctors delivered the devastating news. His latest tests are not good, and they are worse than anyone had expected. Suddenly, everything is different. The hospital room has a tense atmosphere. Scrappy's family, doctors whispering softly, and machines beeping urgently, they are terrified. Momma Dee holds her phone tightly as she tries to hold back her tears. Standing still with trembling hands, Bambi looks at the doctor and waits for answers. But what's the worst? For the doctors, there are none. The cause of Scrappy's rapidly deteriorating health is unknown. The medical staff is unsure of what to do because his heart rate is irregular and his breathing is weak. His family is now limited to praying. Is Scrappy going to be successful? Or is a far worse event on the horizon? The shocking details of his test results, his family's emotional reactions, and the doctor's last-ditch attempts to save his life are all covered in detail as you watch. This is the update that no one was expecting. Tension was in the air at the hospital, a stifling mix of antiseptic and anxiety that filled the intensive care unit. The monitor's steady beep filled the room, serving as a somber reminder that every second mattered. In the hospital bed, Lil Scrappy lay motionless, his chest barely rising and falling under the weight of the machines that held him steady. Once vibrant and full of life, the rapper was now a fragile individual torn between life and death. His condition was deteriorating by the moment. His breathing was labored, and his normally assured face was pale. Beside him, Bambi sat, trembling as she held his hand. Her manicure, which was normally perfect, had chipped due to the stress of the past few days. She sounded hoarse from mumbling prayers that never seemed to be heard, and her eyes were swollen from crying all the time. "You promised me that you wouldn't leave me," so she put her fingers to his cheek in the hopes that he would move and whispered, "Scrappy, baby, please, you gotta fight. Lord, don't take my son. Not in this manner." Momma Dee, the fierce matriarch who had always been a rock, stood near the door and watched with lustrous eyes, but all she could do was watch helplessly after fighting for her son all her life and shielding him from the outside world, but appearing to be holding herself together with her arms crossed tightly, her occasional sniffle revealing her broken heart. She rocked slightly on her feet. The door squeaked open and the chief doctor, Dr. Mitchell, whose normally calm and collected face was now itched with concern and fatigue, entered the room. Although he had delivered bad news before, this case made him feel different. And he knew how much was at stake because he had seen the public's love and the fans' passionate pleas. His hands clasped together, he took a deep breath and looked from Bambi to Momma Dee. "We need to talk," he said in a tone that was softer but firmer than normal. Bambi's head pleaded with her eyes. "What is it? What is happening?" Dr. Mitchell sighed deeply and raked his graying hair before saying, "Scrappy's most recent test results have returned, and they don't look good." A dense silence fell over the room, and everyone felt as if a weight had been placed on them. Momma Dee's hands clenched into fists and she inhaled sharply, saying, "How awful. We have been closely monitoring his heart, and there are signs that the strain is worsening. His liver function has significantly declined, his oxygen levels have dropped again, and his kidneys are under a lot of stress," the doctor said after he hesitated some seconds. "But you said yesterday that he was improving. How could that have changed so fast?" Bambi shook her head in disbelief. Dr. Mitchell sighed, and his voice was empathetic. "That's what makes circumstances like his unpredictable. On occasion, the body shows indications of recovery prior to unanticipated complications. It is a battle and is getting harder right now." Bambi's eyes were watering, and she gripped Scrappy's hand tighter. "What then does this mean? How do you respond? There's nothing for you?" The expression on Dr. Mitchell's face darkened. "We're doing everything we can. If, on the other hand, his condition does not improve within the next day, we may have to consider alternatives." Momma Dee's voice was sharp, her maternal instincts roaring to the surface. "We may need to consider putting him on life support. If his heart continues to fail, The doctor said after he hesitated. Dialysis in an emergency, a potential transplant if things get worse. Not at all. With a cry of grief and panic, Bambi let out a raw cry. That is not possible. Scrappy is a combative individual, and this is not how he will pass away. With a trembling but firm voice, Momma Dee took the initiative, letting her protective instincts take over and saying, "My son has been through too much to just give up now. He will succeed. He needs to." Dr. Mitchell nodded thoughtfully. He glanced at Scrappy's vitals one last time, then returned his attention to the machines, saying, "We're doing everything in our power to make sure that happens. But I need you both to prepare. It's critical for the next 24 hours." The outside world was already reacting to the hospital. Concern erupted on social media, and the news was in a frenzy. Fans flooded Instagram and Twitter, desperate for updates. An international trend was #pray for Scrappy. Close friends, fellow artists, and celebrities were posting heartfelt messages urging everyone to send prayers and positive energy. To support Scrappy, even those who had previously disagreed with him were putting aside their differences. In the hospital room, the tension was unbearable. Bambi and Momma Dee were silent because of unspoken fears. Then Bambi finally spoke. "Every prayer we can get is needed," she said resolutely. "We must call everyone." Momma Dee pulled out her phone and nodded. "We're not merely praying. We are involved in combat." The machines all around Scrappy continued to beep, each one indicating how serious the situation was. As the evening wore on, one question remained. Could prayer alone save him this time? There was unbearable tension in the hospital. Due to Scrappy's fragile state, each moment felt like it went on forever. The only sound in the room was the beep of the monitors, a warning that his fate was in jeopardy. Bambi wiped away her tears, trying to stay strong, but the situation was becoming too stressful for her. Momma Dee may have appeared fierce on the outside, but on the inside she was crying. Outside the hospital, things were just as bad. Scrappy's deteriorating health had become widely known. Outside the hospital, fans had gathered, praying, holding candles, and hoping for a miracle, desperate to hear any new information. Cameras flashing, paparazzi surrounded reporters eager to get any exclusive information. Every major outlet was covering the story, and the media was going crazy. The headlines screamed out. The worsening of Lil Scrappy's condition has left the family in despair. Doctors fear the worst. Will Scrappy survive? There's a chance that Lil Scrappy requires life support. There was a lot of anxiety in the room as Scrappy's closest friends, Kirk Frost, Rashida, and Young Jock, came in the open door and rushed to Bambi and Momma Dee, their faces white with fear. "Hey, what the hell is going on?" Young Jock made the demand in a voice that was shaking with urgency. "I believe he was improving." Bambi shook her head, unable to come up with a response. The doctor said his heart is under too much pressure and his organs are struggling. Momma Dee explained, inhaling deeply. With a gasp, Rashida covered her mouth. "Oh my God, this isn't possible." Stepping forward, Kirk Frost put his hand on Bambi's shoulder. "You can reach us. We have everything you need, Scrappy." Bambi mumbled, "He must fight for me." Her eyes welled up with tears. "All I need is for him to wake up." Everyone held their breath as they froze as Dr. Mitchell reappeared, his face unreadable. "We've conducted more tests," he said slowly, pausing to examine Scrappy's unconscious body before adding, "The results, they don't make any promises." Kirk grabbed Bambi as she was about to pass out and held her in place. "What does that mean?" Her voice was croaky. With a serious expression, Dr. Mitchell sighed. "He is experiencing a decline in kidney function. His heartbeat is not regular. If this continues, he may experience total organ failure." A collective gasp sounded throughout the room. The fists of Young Jock clenched. "No, dude, this is incorrect. You guys must be able to do something." Dr. Mitchell nodded his head. "Future plans include dialysis and high-dose therapies, but we must wait for his body to respond. If not, we may have to consider putting him on life support." "No," cried Momma Dee, her voice breaking as she shouted, "My child is strong. There are no machines that he needs to live." Dr. Mitchell softened his expression and said, "I understand that this is difficult, but we are starting to run out of options." The room fell silent as those words' impact set in. Then the heart monitor suddenly started beeping wildly. The head of Bambi toward the screen. "What's going on? What's the matter?" With Dr. Mitchell hurrying to the patient's bedside, nurses flooded into the room. "His pulse is pounding." Young Jock screamed. "Action!" Panic is beginning to set in. The tension was unbearable as the nurses hurriedly adjusted machines and injected drugs while everyone watched, their hearts pounding in time with the unpredictable beat on the screen. The hours flew by and finally the beeping stopped. Dr. Mitchell exhaled. "All right, we have him steady. But this means that the situation is urgent." After burying her face in her hands, Bambi collapsed into a chair. "This is impossible," she exclaimed. "I can't let him go." Next to her, Momma Dee knelt with her hands clasped tightly. "We will fight, baby, and we will fight with everything we have. We will not lose him. It doesn't seem real. This isn't how things should be," young Jock said, shaking his head and pacing the room. Subsequently, Scrappy twitched his fingers and his eyelids moved slightly, as if the universe had heard them. Gasping, Bambi said, "Hard?" Everyone ran to join him. His eyes barely opened, and his voice barely raised above a whisper. "Bam?" Bambi snatched his hand and cried, choking, "I'm here, baby. Here I am." Scrappy struggled to keep his gaze on him. He breathed shallowly and spoke weakly. "What's happening then?" Dr. Mitchell stepped in delicately. "Scrappy, you've been in the intensive care unit. Your body is fighting hard." "Am I going to die?" Scrappy swallowed, trying to understand. Bambi shook her head quickly and said, "No, no, my love. You will be fine. You just need to get some rest." Mother Dee wiped her eyes. "Boy, you scared the living daylights out of us." Scrappy blinked a little. "I'm still here." Everyone felt a momentary sense of relief. Dr. Mitchell's face did not lighten. "Everything will be decided in the next 24 hours, so you need to fight even harder than before, Scrappy." With a slow blink, Scrappy said, "I got you." Bambi kissed his forehead and said, "My man is that." Alarms went off again, though, as hope began to rise. The machines were blaring, Scrappy tensed, and his breathing became erratic. Dr. Mitchell's expression turned pale. "He's abandoning us again." The nursing staff rushed as the room erupted in panic, realizing that the battle was just beginning and far from over. Additionally, this time it was life or death. The hospital room was filled with uncertainty, and the sound of the beeping machines broke the eerie silence like a menacing clock ticking away. Each beep and machine noise was a reminder that Lil Scrappy's time was running out. The once bright rapper who had captivated the world with his energy now seemed to be a fragile shell fighting for survival, his chest barely rising with each shallow breath. "Please, Scrappy, you promised me." Bambi sat next to him, her hands shaking as she held Scrappy's limp hand. Her once immaculately manicured nails were chipped and broken from all the hours she spent by his bedside and the sleepless nights she had endured. Her heart ached every second, her eyes swollen from crying, and her stomach twisted in horror every time the monitors beeped. The matriarch who had always been Scrappy's strongest ally, Momma Dee, paced back and forth at the edge of the room, her face etched with worry, her hands so tight on her phone that they whitened her knuckles. And she was a rock, but now she could do nothing but watch as her son's life was in danger. And though she muttered prayers to herself, she knew deep down that faith alone would not save him at this point. There was more to it. Outside the hospital, the world was in a panic. Fans were begging for Scrappy to recover and praying. Hashtags like #FightScrappy and #PrayForScrappy took over Instagram and Twitter, and his friends, fellow artists, and even people who had argued with him in the past sent heartfelt messages asking their followers to remember him. We all watched, prayed, and hoped for a miracle. But on the inside, things were different. The doctors had just delivered devastating news, and the lead doctor, Dr. Mitchell had just stepped in with the shocking results of the latest tests. Scrappy's liver was in worse shape. His oxygen levels had dropped once more, his kidneys were barely surviving, and he could feel the pressure building on his already sick heart. "But just yesterday, you said he was improving," Bambi said, her voice trembling as she asked the question that had been on everyone's mind. "How suddenly did this happen?" Dr. Mitchell took a deep breath, regret gleaming in his eyes. Sometimes the body may exhibit false signs of recovery. Sometimes it might not be predictable. His organs had shown some improvement, but now troubles have surfaced. Although his body is fighting, it is not enough. Momma Dee shot back, "What do you mean? It's not enough. How should we proceed? You're telling me that you're at your limit?" In an angry and disbelieving tone, Dr. Mitchell hesitated, his face growing gloomy. "Despite our best efforts, we may need to take more drastic measures because his condition is getting worse. A transplant or emergency dialysis may be necessary if he does not stabilize in the next 24 hours. We may also have to put him on life support if his heart continues to fail." "No!" Bambi's voice broke with raw emotion, and she began sobbing uncontrollably. "You can't do that. He's a combative person. Scrappy won't die like this. My son has been through too much to give up now," Momma Dee said, stepping forward as her protective instincts took over. "He will not be going. We're going to battle. We need to." Dr. Mitchell nodded gravely at that. "But the next 24 hours are crucial, and we have to be prepared for anything. We're doing everything we can." Bambi and Momma Dee were silent as the doctor left the room, both of them knowing that time was running out and that their only options were to wait and pray. And neither of them knew what to say because the situation was weighing them down like a heavy burden. News outlets carried stories with headlines like "Doctors fear Scrappy's life is on the line" and "Lil Scrappy's condition worsens." Family desperate. Recovery was no longer the focus. It was now a matter of survival. The media circus outside continued to intensify, with reporters frantically trying to gather any information as paparazzi cameras flashed outside the hospital. Fans continued to send supportive messages, but the tone had changed. "Everyone needs to be called," said Bambi, rising to her feet with a determined voice as she reached her breaking point. "We need as many people to pray as we can. We've got to fight. He must not be left alone now." Even though Momma Dee was having emotional difficulties, she nodded in agreement. "We're not merely praying. We are involved in combat. We're not going to leave him." Pulling out her phone, Bambi dialed the numbers of her relatives and close friends. Even though there seemed to be no hope, she was sure that Scrappy's spirit would live on through his loved ones. Additionally, those love and prayers had to be enough. Surely it was. It was impossible to bear the tension in the room. All around him, the buzzes and beeps of the machines reminded Scrappy of his vulnerability. Bambi tightened his hold on his hand each time the machines made a noise. She couldn't surrender. Not just yet. Not just when he needed her most. And then the miracle happened. Scrappy fumbled with his fingers. The slight movement was barely noticeable and could have gone unnoticed. For Bambi, however, it was everything. She gasped and leaned closer, her heart pounding in her chest. She whispered, "Difficult?" Her voice was full of hope. Scrappy's eyes flickered open and closed, inability to focus, but his voice was clear enough. "Bam?" "Breathing hard," he whispered. Relief swelled Bambi's heart as she sobbed. "Baby, I'm here. I'm right here." She started crying uncontrollably and kissed him on the forehead. "You will be fine, so just take a nap. Don't worry." Momma Dee wiped away her own tears while kneeling beside her son and said, "Boy, you scared the living daylights out of us." Scrappy smiled slightly and said, "I stay here." Everyone in the room sighed with relief, but Dr. Mitchell remained in the doorway, unconvinced, and stepped forward earnestly, saying, "Scrappy, you must continue to fight for us. The matter will be resolved within the next 24 hours." Scrappy mumbled, "I understand you," as his eyes met Bambi's despite his weariness. But disaster arrived just as the tiniest glimmer of hope was beginning to emerge. Pale-faced medical staff rushed into the room to try to stabilize Scrappy as his body tensed and his chest rose and fell in rapid, irregular breaths as a series of shrill beeps, louder than before, came from the machines. "He has a racing pulse, doctor." Fear pierced Mitchell's voice as he screamed. "We must move quickly." Nurses crowded the room, mixing medications, tinkering with equipment, and collaborating with a sense of urgency that only came in life or death situations. Bambi felt her stomach sink. "What's going on? What's the matter?" She sobbed, her voice breaking. Standing in the corner, young Jacques could no longer hold back his feelings. "Do something," he screamed, his voice trembling with fear. Hours went by in a matter of seconds. Everyone watched the heart monitor intently, hoping it would stabilize. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the beeping stopped. The physicians all exhaled in unison, their faces grim but relieved. Bambi and Momma Dee caught Dr. Mitchell's attention. "We have temporarily stabilized him, but this is just the beginning. His condition is critical, so we have to be ready for anything." Bambi collapsed into one of the chairs, her head caught in her hands. "I can't let him go. I can't." She took her hands in hers, and Momma Dee knelt beside her. "We will fight to ensure that he overcomes this. We won't let him go." The war was only beginning, and it had not yet ended. Every prayer matters in the next 24 hours. Please let the world know if you believe that support is powerful. This is not just another update. It's a battle for Lil Scrappy's life. Let's show Scrappy and his family our support during this incredibly difficult time. We will keep you informed at every stage of this shocking situation. So don't forget to subscribe to our channel for the latest information. Remember Scrappy, keep yourself informed, and stay in contact.